Well, good evening, everybody. As Kelly said, it's really wonderful to be here in a room with people. It is an experience I didn't have since March 2020, so I'm really happy to be here, and thank you for the Western Reserve Historical Society for this opportunity and making it happen. So for today in our conversation, we will explore how African American women, like Amanda Wicker, who's the topic of this great exhibition that I hope you all had the chance to look at or will have the chance to see, and how they influence the fashion industry and use fashion in their role both as designers and creators to fight for racial and gender equality. These and other topics is what I explore in my own new book, which you can order now from Amazon or your favorite retailers. And if you'll do it through the press, you can even get a 30% off. And now I'll stop with the selling. But this book really examines how different groups of women used fashion and appearance to advance feminist agendas and to challenge gender, class, and racial identities throughout the 20th century. And in the book, I show how the rise of mass media and culture turned fashion really into an accessible medium for women, especially those who were barred from positions of power, whether due to their class or to their race, to experience and to express new freedoms. And rather than serving as a hindrance to women's political engagement, as we often think about fashion, what I show in the book is that really fashion became an important part and important aspect for women, not only to assert claims over their bodies, their femininity, and social role, but really an important aspect for what we think of the feminist movement in the 20th century, which are oftentimes we're not thinking about both feminism and fashion as something that goes together. And for African American women in particular, fashion served, and really both during and after slavery, a means to shape ideas regarding the Black women's bodies and appearance, and as a route to claim freedom and inclusion in American culture, as well as also as a means for racial mobility and racial uplift in the community. And the dressmaking trade offered a lucrative business route for many Black women, providing them with an autonomy and a venue to express their creativity and oftentimes in ways that was not open to them in other professions. So already in 1893, civil rights activist Mary Church Terrell, which you can see here, called for the establishment of vocational education for girls in dressmaking and millinery as a way to improve their social position. Many had heard to this call, and between 1900 and 1910, the proportions of Black women in domestic work, which was the most common occupation for Black women after emancipation, that dropped from 92% to 84% as the numbers of seamstress, dressmakers, tailoress, and milliners increased. So dressmaking, which was really could be done at home without a lot of investment in capital, you can just rent or purchase a sewing machine and start a business, proved an especially attractive occupation for many new migrants in the early 20th century that came from the South to the North and the Midwest, like Amanda Wicker, who came to Cleveland. New York, unlike Cleveland, who used to be the fashion capital, and it still is, really became a center for African American designers who found the aspiring class of Harlem and also its growing entertainment scene as a good source for clients and profits. But Cleveland, as Amanda Wicker will find out, and we'll soon hear about that, was also a great source for women like her to gain a position in her community. And Black women were always part of the fashion industry, and we need to remember that, both as producers and as consumers, both of cloth and of clothing. Enslaved dressmakers oftentimes bought their freedom by using their own skills, their sewing skill, and as free women, they went to have a career. Maybe the most famous of it is the Lincoln, right, wife's seamstress that actually bought her freedom like that. Some worked as independent dressmakers and milliners. Some worked for retail and other couture establishments. And whether the bulk of clients for the Black designers was their own community, some designers such as Anne Lowe, maybe the most famous of it, who designed the wedding dress that Jacqueline Bouvier wore in her wedding to John F. Kennedy, achieved national fame and acquired a long list of white customers. And selling both custom-made and ready-to-wear dresses, African-American women entrepreneurs played a pivotal role in bringing fashion within Black women's reach, serving as important financial pillars of their own community and as example of this racial uplift ideology. And these designers did not work alone, but sought to create a network, not only for professional reasons, but also as part of their vision of activism and how to better African American community and to fight for racial justice. And the most known and powerful organization, even though it's not really known, but among the African American community it is known, that sought to promote this Black design and Black designers, and Amanda Wicker was also very active in it, was the National Association of Fashion and Accessories Designers, or NAFED, which was an organization that was founded in 1949 and is still active today. The decision to found NAFED came from in 1948 after a successful attempt in New York to integrate a fashion show in celebration of New York Golden Jubilee, and the designer Zelda Wynne-Valdez went on and fought to get included in this fashion show, and with her frustration from being ignored by this mainstream industry and understanding that we need to kind of like get together and fight for representation, she and a group of designers founded the organization, as its first president as Janetta Welch Brown. But NAFED was not just a professional organization. It was a combination of a professional club and a civil rights movement. The organization was affiliated with and supported by Mary McLeod Bethune and the National Council of Negro Women, which set much of the tone of its initial structure as well as its headquarters that were in Washington, D.C. and not in New York, where most fashion designers reside. But very quickly, NAFED had branches in other places like Philadelphia and of course Cleveland, where Wicker was active. And the mission of NAFED, according to its constitution, was to foster complete integration of its membership in all phases of the fashion industry through the extension and educational economic opportunities, the dissemination of permanent information, the offering of local and national scholarships, and the display of fashion in good taste. And indeed, NAFED always espoused to be an integranist organization that sought to increase the recognition and visibility of Black design, not only among African Americans, but also vis-a-vis white society. And while the organization itself was composed only of Black designers and only of women designers for a long time, it did not seek to create a separatist movement, but to really be recognized as equals in the fashion industry. And education was really important for an emphasis for NAFED, which looked not only to promote existing designers, but also encourage young people to enter the field. So in 1949, it founded Rho Delta Pi, a sorority whose purpose was to form a sisterhood of designers and models that will encourage high standards in each profession, and as well as improve and raise the status of designers and models in their community and the nation. And the sorority was supposed not only to supply members to the organization, which was always under kind of like financial stress, but also to serve as an important professional development resource that will help kind of like further this message. And many of the NAFED activities concentrated on this professional development. So they organized conferences and national conventions that showcased Black designers and created networking opportunities. In addition, they also published a newsletter named Fashion Q. They built a showing room for retail buyers and sought an affiliation with the Costume Institute of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, so members could use its collection for inspirations in their own design. NAFED also organized fashion shows and events that were heavily covered in the Black press and increased designers' name recognition among the Black community. By 1954, it collaborated with Ebony magazine on their Best Dressed Woman of the Year, an event that also increased Black designers' visibility. So NAFED designers like Wicker and Wynn positioned themselves as high fashion professional, partly because evening wear needs more skill, and so it can be sold for a higher price. But it also was easier to some degree for NAFED to raise the visibility and the name recognition of couture designers rather than retail designers that were oftentimes worked for the ready-made industry but were anonymous to the customers. But NAFED did not limit themselves only to high fashion, and understanding that exactly because retail designers are anonymous, it might be easier for African Americans to get into those professions because the company can not say that they're hiring. So they believe that the wholesale business, which was always in the lookout for new talent, will be maybe open more to Black designers, and they put a lot of emphasis also there. But as the 1950s progressed and the civil rights movement started to get more public attention, NAFED itself became more radicalized, demanding not just racial equality, but racial visibility. And staying true to their uplift mission and to the legacy of Mary McLeod Bethune, it fought for civil rights goals through their mission to promote African American design. So for members, fashion, and especially what they considered to be good fashion and good design, became a form of activism, just like marches and sit-ins and voter registration efforts. So for them to show that they have good designs was their form of activism. And if NAFED is not known today, this is certainly not due to their lack of efforts. But we need, I think, to remember that NAFED did provide a model for Black resilience, an example of how Black women can find creative ways to work around white discrimination and marginalization, yet without relying on separatism and exclusion. And NAFED, in many ways, never managed to break the barriers of the periphery that they were located in, but its action and initiative did pave a way for another and new generation of Black designers that found job and voice within the fashion world, and I hope we'll hear about it later. And in an industry that often ignored Black people, both as producers and as consumers, NAFED designers managed to carve themselves a niche from which they can make a difference. And Amanda Wicker, I think, is a great example of that. So I'll let.
Introduce yourself.
Sorry, I apologize. So yeah, you're right. So my name is Einav Rabinovitch-Fox. I'm a historian who teaches here at Case Western Reserve University, and my research deal with the connections between fashion, politics, culture, and as you can see, I have a new book, as I talked about it before, and there are flyers there that you can look and get your book and information. And yeah, that is me.
Welcome. My name is Patricia Edmonson, and I'm the Museum Advisory Council, Curator of Costume and Textiles here at the Western Reserve Historical Society. I'm not used to talking in a mask. I've been on maternity leave for 3 months, so I've been alone at home a lot. But I'm going to try to keep my portion brief because I hope that after we're done, you'll join me in the gallery and we can look at the exhibit together. Can I see a show of hands of anybody that's already seen the Amanda Wicker show? Okay, so some of you, but good. Our whole sort of front row here, it'll be new to you. So I welcome you to join us in the gallery afterwards for a little bit. So I've been here at the Historical Society for about 5.5 years now, and I've spent some time getting to know the collection, and the history of the collection is really based around what was donated by these Millionaires Row families. So if you're a Clevelander, that might mean something to you. You know, these wealthy families that lived along Euclid Avenue, and in the 1930s they were like, oh, we've got grandma's, you know, dresses, and it tended to be these wealthy white families, and it was an amazing way to start to build the collection. But over time the collection really represented a certain section of Cleveland, and not others. So it's been one of my goals to try to both reveal aspects of the collection that are more diverse, but also to collect things related to other parts of Cleveland. And I have a specific focus, a personal interest in representing African Americans in Cleveland. So learning that we had first the Amanda Wicker archive here in the library was really amazing. The Clark School, she took all these she and others took all these photos of fashion shows and the students' work, and so there's an amazing photographic archive, and we have a small selection of those in the show. And then I finally found out that we had 13 garments that Amanda Wicker made, which I didn't know for a couple of years. They were donated by her niece, and so there wasn't a connection in the system, and finally I just kind of figured it out by walking through storage one day and seeing something labeled Amanda Wicker. I was like, what? So we opened this exhibit in June, and I'm excited to share her story with you. Amanda Wicker was part of the Great Migration. She moved to Cleveland in the 1920s with her husband. He passed away less than a year after they moved here, so for the rest of her life she did date, but she was a single woman entrepreneur who made a huge impact in the community. This is one of my favorite photos of her from the 1970s. She was operating in the neighborhood along Cedar in the East 80s and 90s, which looks totally different today. The sort of landmarks that are still there today would be the churches. She was a member of the Baptist Church, which in this 1930s map is the Cedar Avenue Baptist Church there on the left. And so then the Clark School of Dressmaking was here, and Amanda Wicker's home was here. She started her business at home with really a single client in the 1920s, and then over the next decade grew to acquire more clients and then to open up her official Clark School of Dressmaking. It's named the Clark School of Dressmaking because Addie Clark was her mentor in Washington, D.C., where she took tailoring classes. So I do have a small gallery in the show where we kind of explore this neighborhood a little bit, trying to give some period images, because a lot of the buildings aren't there anymore. So this is the Clark School of Dressmaking. The building was located on 89th and Cedar. The building's not there anymore. It was probably a really cool place to be because you had the Clark School, but then also there were milliners and other designers who had their studios there. So it would have been this sort of hub in the neighborhood. And during this period, along that stretch, you had both Black and white owned businesses. In an oral history that Amanda Wicker did, she talks about how over time more and more businesses came to be Black owned, and so she really enjoyed watching the community sort of build itself up in that neighborhood. She really got the school ramped up in the 40s. This is when she started the Book of Gold fashion show. So this is one of the earlier images that we have. We don't really have any pictures of her or her work from the 1920s and 30s. They just didn't get saved or documented as much, and so in the 1940s is when our collection really starts to grow. So here she is with a graduating class. And at this point, she was working more with young women, people who had already graduated from high school and wanted to learn a skill. She would teach you to revamp your own wardrobe, to kind of empower you that way. She could train you on industrial machinery. She could teach drafting and couture techniques. So she really had a variety of ways to empower people, prepare them to improve their own lives or to enter the workforce. And then during the 1940s as well, she became GI certified in 1949. And she didn't just become GI certified, she really worked with Veterans Association to let Black veterans know, like, hey, this program exists and it should benefit you, because there were a lot of Black veterans who just, I think, weren't given the information about all of the opportunities that veterans could have. So that just speaks a little bit about Amanda Wicker. You know, yes, she's a designer, but I think her main purpose was to create opportunities and to better she was from Georgia, but Cleveland became her home for the rest of her life until she died in 1987. And so this is one of my favorite images of some of those veterans. And this is also when the makeup of the school started to change a little bit. You had more male participants. I mentioned her fashion shows. This was a way to raise money for the school. So here she is sort of at the introduction of one of her fashion shows. And this just shows you how big of an audience. It grew from being at somewhere like Karamu, which is a pretty small venue, to Central High School, much bigger spaces, and hotel spaces. It was held at various locations. And within our archive, we've got programs from these shows, which show both, it names all of the student designers and the teachers, but as well as businesses who are supporting her. And all of the tickets that were sold for this fashion show then supported the school and scholarships for students as young as middle school students. And during the 60s, she really shifted towards working with high school students. She also had a relationship with the Phyllis Wheatley Association, which is still around today. And we'll see in the exhibit, there's a dress that she made for Dorothy, who became Dorothy Tolliver when she married. And they met through the Phyllis Wheatley Association originally, and church. On the right is an ensemble that Amanda Wicker made. And we have 13 garments that this is something that she made for herself, and it was something that she would wear to church or a business meeting of some sort. And in places like the Colin Post, she was sort of a local celebrity in a way. They called her Madam Wicker, and the Colin Post would describe what she was wearing sometimes. You know, the lady of the week is Mrs. Wicker in her, fur cape going to church, yada yada. And then we also have some things that she made specifically for venues like NAFAD. So Einav talked about that professional organization. Amanda Wicker helped co-found the Cleveland chapter in 1951, and she wasn't the first president of that chapter, but she eventually became president of the Cleveland chapter and helped to do their first fashion show here. And so what's really cool is we have 2 garments where we can match up the garment to our archival photo. And you can see these were made for models, not herself. Amanda Wicker was pretty pretty gorgeous, but she hired models to be in the fashion shows for NAFAD. So it was fun to connect these things during my research. After a couple of years being involved in NAFAD, she kind of moved on to other things, and she still remained involved with NAFAD, but she really focused, like I said, on connecting with local institutions like local high schools, Black business women's organizations, the church. She was very active in her church and that community. And then in the show, I also tried to highlight a little bit of what else was going on in terms of Black fashion in Cleveland. And so this is Madeline Blunt on the left, and then you can see that there she is on the right there. She deserves a show of her own, I think, and her daughter is still around in Cleveland, but she founded Gracious Living magazine, which was sort of a short-lived. We have 2 issues in our library, but they're in the exhibit, and they're really beautiful magazines, and I'm sad that you can't take them out of the case and read them, because the people who were writing for it, you have Bob Madison writing about the architecture, you have Charles Saleh writing about interior design. So these are like nationally famous Clevelanders who are helping to write for this beautiful magazine for the Black community. And then later she organized both events and a publication called Club Date. So I know Regina has been to some of those Club Date events in the past, but to really create a gathering space for Clevelanders to exchange ideas and make connections. So Amanda Wicker, of course, knew Madeline Blunt. They were part of this creative community. And then I just want to finish with the last image that we have of Amanda Wicker, where her wig's a little more obvious at this point, but this is shortly before she passed away the year before. And it's hard to tell because it's black and white, but we do have that ensemble in the show that she made for herself. And so I want to keep it brief. Amanda Wicker, I think, is just this fantastic example of the type of women that Einav talks about in her research, basically like a case study in Cleveland. She's not nationally famous in the way that some of the New York NAFAD members are, but for decades she was a name that people in Cleveland knew, and they would go to both for her to make clothes for them, but also to learn from her to benefit their own lives. So I wanted to transition to Dru Thompson, and I wanted oh yeah, go ahead, Kelly.
I don't want to interrupt, but I just wanted to acknowledge Patty and Regina and others involved with this exhibit, that Amanda Wicker was inducted into the Ohio Women's Hall of Fame.
Yes.
In August by the Women's Suffrage Centennial Commission. So I wanted to thank you for bringing her back into the light and for nominating her for that award. She was one of 5 women that was inducted into the Ohio Women's Hall of Fame this year.
I didn't know it was a 1-5. So yeah, so go Amanda Wicker. I mean, I feel really honored to be able to tell her story, and we've done that here. It would be really great to maybe write an article that gets published somewhere. So there's still more to learn about her. I mean, if you look in the Column Post archive, there's like hundreds of articles that mention her, and it really becomes obvious to someone like how instrumental she was in her community. But anyway, I wanted to invite Dru here today. Dru Thompson is a designer and an educator, and I'll let her introduce herself, but we have objects by Dru in our collection. Was it 2 years ago? Part of her Juneteenth collection. Yeah. And so she's a museum collected designer, and we've asked her to talk a little bit about what's going on in Cleveland today as compared to Amanda Wicker's time. So.
My name is Dru Thompson. I'm an owner and designer of Dru Christine Fabrics Design. So, oh my goodness. I don't know. Let's see. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, no. All right. I teach in school, so I can yell too. So, yeah, I thought it was cool that Patty invited me to come. So, in the times of now, if you say you're trying to have a fashion design studio in Cleveland, they're like, what? What are you trying to do? So, with a little creativity and a lot of work, and thank God for social media, we were able to hang in there. So I've been open almost 10 years. So I'm located in Lake Effect Studios, close to Cleveland State. I started off in Lee and Mayfield area next to Green Walls and Antiques. Then I moved to the Waterloo Arts District. And so the common thread with all those businesses is that I always taught someone, because we realized I had this business and I couldn't find anybody to help me do the work. So, I mean, you would talk to people and say they know how to sew, and obviously they don't. They know how to sew off YouTube, or they know how to sew off. So eventually I figured out I need to teach people how to sew. So my business model did change. It started off as just the custom design work. I started sewing for people when I started sewing when I was 13, and I took my first client at 19. So I've been sewing for people about 10 years. I'm only 29. Can you believe that? So my work started, we used to have these things called hair shows. Anybody remember hair shows we used to have? So that's really where I ground my teeth in working. Like we would make all these like 10, 15 outfits in two days for these people. We were doing it every week. So that's another aspect of the museum I would love to see, because that's a whole nother crazy world. Those hair shows were like, but I made a lot of money at 19, I was just like, a lot of money during that time. So eventually I went on and opened my own studio. And so like I said, I always end up having to teach people how to sew. So when I started reading the Amanda Wicker story, the parallel, it was crazy, because I'd never heard of it until Patricia told me about it. But I also sell fabric in my studio. So I would have clients that come in and they'll say they went to the Clark School of Dressmaking. So it was just this weird circle of events that kept happening regarding what's going on. And it's interesting how it's still a disconnect between the sewing and the fashion design. And we still don't know exactly where Cleveland ended up not being the center of fashion anymore, because we're so far from that right now. So I always joke, I'm in Cleveland, the fashion capital of the world. So people think that's funny. So my teaching also extended into the schools. So now I teach sewing at Cleveland School of the Arts. So we have a fashion design program. And I'm really connected to that work, because I find people that look like me, they're not always represented in the fashion industry. Even when I was in school, it was always a big thing. It was like 2 or 3 blacks in my class. So we went off and made our whole other own fashion organization and started having our own fashion shows, and just kept doing the work that way. So a lot of us are still doing it. I have friends who are still designing today, including myself, for those organizations. So some of my students from Cleveland School of Arts have gone on to study fashion design at Ursuline College. We have kids that went on to North Coast. So it's just all about being that influence and showing your face. And just so people can see a face that looks like them. So the sewing just was always my thing. We can always do the avant-garde, beautiful look, but we always have to go back and do the practical work. So my whole speech about teaching people how to sew, it kind of blew up, but guess what happened? The mask. That blew up in everybody's face, literally, in everybody's face. So, I'm forgetting my slides. I'm gonna go to the mask. I'm just talking. I'll go back and talk about those later. Anyway, so when the mask happened, most designers like myself, we weren't making any masks. Oh, we're just not, I'm not doing that. Oh, we didn't know it was gonna last now, still to now. So I had a cousin, I'll flip to that. Sorry, I was just talking. I'll go back to that later. I had a cousin that was a doctor in New York, and she said, make me a mask. I'm like, all right, I'll do it, because she'll tell my mom and I'll get in trouble if I don't do it. So I made her a mask, several, and I put this picture on Facebook, and I don't know who shared this picture. I woke up the next morning, my phone was like exploded. Mask. So I don't even know how, I don't even make them anymore in my shop. If you come in, I'll probably give you one. I don't even make them anymore. But that really kept my business going. I mean, so even though I didn't want to do it, it kept us open, because think about it, no schools, that was one of my jobs. Every job I possibly had associated with sewing and touching was gone because of the pandemic. So leads me back to seeing why sewing is important. So we have major companies calling us like, hey, we just bought all these sewing machines and we have this big major place to make masks. Can you send us any sewers? I said, when you find them, you send them to me, because we don't have them. So it was just such a great, huge disconnect between sewing and fashion. So I realized my work to keep teaching sewing is very important. So even though I still do the fashionable, high fashion, beautiful things, I still go back to teaching sewing. I'm inspired by Amanda Wicker, and I mean, I feel like I'm behind, I need to do more stuff. But yeah, I'm inspired, so let's see.
She was 9, she lived to be 90 almost, so you have some time.
I got about 70 years to go. So here's a couple pictures of just basically this is obviously pre-pandemic, but I mean, we get so many people in, and some of the stories we get people who say, oh, my grandmother tried to teach me how to sew and I didn't want to learn. You get people in who say, my husband didn't want me spending money on fabric. I mean, we got so many stories. So I'll just share some of these pictures, and then I can take a couple of questions. But like the kids, so we teach kids, that's at Lincoln West. That's some of my other kids' classes. That was, like I said, so if you see no mask, you know it's pre-pandemic, obviously. And I was skinnier on that picture, so that's a long time. So, yeah, so it's just, kids are always interested in the fashion, in the sewing. That was some of our sewing classes. This is my studio in Lake Effect. This is the girl when she threads. This is like my favorite part of my sewing class. When somebody threads the bobbin and threads the machine and it works. That's like, and I still get a kick out of it. So this is what, you see her face? She had threaded the machine and the bob was working, so she just flipped out. And it's like my favorite. So we had an event called Sip and Sew, and we sipped and drank wine and made stuff. And that was very popular, obviously. That's my sewing machines. That was Lauren Hill. When she came to Cleveland, they called and I did her alterations. And that was a pretty cool moment because, again, it honed in on the experience that I was able to do because I knew how to sew. And I think it was a shocker to her that somebody her age was standing there with a sewing machine in my hand. And I'm like, I had to calm down because I was a fan, but I got it together. And I was with her all day. So that's some of my work. See, that's the little boy maze, and that's prom, which, ooh, we taking a break from prom, child. This is a male's look we did. This is how my clients do me. She brings me this dress from eBay. And I turned it into the other one, the one next to it. But I thought she was crazy when she bought me that dress. I'm like, what do you think I'm doing with this? That's me in my shop. So like I said, we do sell fabric. What happened? No pictures. Oh. And then that's my first shop, Lee and Mayfield. So next to Greenwald's Antique, across from Rockefeller. Yep. That's the outside. That's young Dru at Kent State University. So I started off at Kent State, partied a little bit too much. My parents made me transfer to the University of Akron. So I have a degree in fashion merchandising, not design. So, yeah, that's it. So it's just very casual talk, but I just wanted to show you that somebody is here doing things in Cleveland. Fashion related, it's still going. We're teaching.